Part 1. The Beginning. In a small alley of an old city fading with time, there stood a humble little shoe shop. The glass was dusty, and a wooden sign, crooked with age, read, "Mr. Thomas's Shoe Repair. Everything fixed with heart. Mr." Thomas, the shop owner, was a man in his 60s with silver hair, but his eyes still gleamed with vitality. His hands, despite age, remained as skillful as ever. Day after day, he sat at his wooden workbench, carefully restoring old shoes for his customers with quiet dedication. He was known around the neighborhood as the kind old shoemaker, though few knew that he was once a renowned designer, invited to collaborate with major fashion houses, offers he had quietly turned down. One late autumn afternoon, the shop door creaked open. A young man named Ethan entered, his shoulders weighed down by uncertainty. He had just graduated from university and was struggling to find his first job. In his hands was a worn pair of leather shoes, the soles torn and the color faded. He hesitated, then placed them gently on the counter. "I'd like these fixed, please," he said softly. Mr. Thomas picked up the shoes and examined them with the tenderness of someone handling a treasured artifact. "These shoes hold a lot of memories, don't they?" he asked. Ethan nodded, trying to smile. "They were a gift from my father when I got into university. He's gone now. I don't want to throw them away." Mr. Thomas said nothing more. With quiet focus, he began working. Stitch by stitch, glue by glue, his hands moved with grace and care as if breathing life back into the tired shoes. Ethan sat silently watching. Somehow the simple act of watching the shoemaker work brought peace to his restless heart. When the repair was done, the shoes looked nearly new, not because of fancy polish, but because they now carried the love and attention of a master craftsman. "How much do I owe you?" Ethan asked. Mr. Thomas smiled and shook his head. "Nothing, just take care of them. These shoes don't just hold memories, they'll walk with you as you search for yourself." Ethan left, shoes in hand, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of a life-changing journey, a journey to rediscover his true worth.
Part 2. A Young Man and the Early Failures. After his encounter with Mr. Thomas, Ethan began stepping into adult life with a mix of hope and hesitation. With his degree in hand, he took on various temporary jobs, from sales assistant to office clerk, none of which truly sparked his passion. Every passing day, amid rushed meals and sterile office lights, he grew more uncertain about himself. He kept asking, "Am I worth anything at all? Why does everything I try seem to end in failure?" Time rolled on. He faced harsh criticism from supervisors, indifference from colleagues, and at times even misunderstanding from friends. Whenever the burden became too much, Ethan would recall Mr. Thomas's words and the pair of shoes, both reminders of something immeasurable, something deeper than titles or promotions. But each time he tried to hold on to that hope, grief would silently return. Grief for the father he had lost, and for the self he no longer recognized. After yet another failed interview, Ethan found himself sitting alone by the roadside in a light drizzle. He looked at his fogged glasses and saw nothing but reflection. That moment triggered a memory, Mr. Thomas's voice. "Don't let others set your worth. That is your decision." But despite the wisdom, Ethan still felt like a shattered mirror, every broken piece reflecting another failure. At night, he wandered the city streets, watching the city lights shimmer, hoping they'd ignite something. Within, he joined conversations, sought comfort in voices, but the words, though kind, felt empty. People seemed only to measure him by what he had achieved, or hadn't. No one saw the internal storms, the questions he struggled to answer. One day he bumped into an old friend, Sophia. Always radiant, always confident. She had found her rhythm in life. She smiled and said, "We shouldn't let others define our worth. Everyone has their own path, and your value comes from recognizing that yourself." Simple words, yet they felt like the first breath after being underwater for too long. Still, the failures kept coming like relentless waves. Ethan tried freelance, writing for a magazine, co-founded a startup that fizzled out, even entered creative competitions. only to face rejection after rejection. With each stumble, his self-doubt deepened. Do I have any value at all? Am I just a number in a world that doesn't care? He wondered. One rainy evening, overwhelmed and weary, he retrieved the old shoes Mr. Thomas had fixed and walked back to the little shop. The streets were quieter now. Shadows stretched long, and a soft rain tapped gently on rooftops. With every step, he felt the weight of not just his failures, but his unanswered questions. When he arrived, the shop was just as he remembered. Warm, lights glowing faintly through dusty glass. Mr. Thomas, as always, sat at his workbench, calm and welcoming. Ethan didn't speak right away. He simply placed the shoes on the counter and sat down, eyes filled with the fatigue of someone who'd wandered too long. He began to share about the setbacks, the fear of being insignificant, and the deep sense of not knowing his place in the world. Mr. Thomas listened, saying nothing, his silence not of indifference but of understanding. After a pause, the old man said, "My boy, those shoes belonged to someone once full of dreams, proud of who he was. But over time, due to pain and failure, he forgot that his true worth wasn't determined by what others saw. These shoes, like people, get scuffed, broken, worn down. But their value lies not in their appearance, but in the memories, the trust, the meaning they carry, and so do you." His words didn't magically fix everything, but they planted something, a seed of reflection, a flicker of strength. Ethan began to realize that perhaps his worth wasn't lost. It was just buried, waiting to be uncovered. That night, as the rain poured quietly outside, Ethan sat longer than usual at the shop. He didn't need answers right away. What he needed, what Mr. Thomas gave, was a reminder that he still had value, even in the midst of feeling completely lost. Part 3, The Journey to Self-Worth. In the days that followed his visit to the little shoe shop, Ethan began to change. He decided to leave behind the jobs that made him feel empty, and instead dedicated his time to exploring the things he truly cared about. He woke up early each morning before the city stirred, jogging through quiet parks and setting aside time to read, meditate, and reflect on who he was and who he wanted to become. In that journey, Ethan met many people. There was Ms. Lily, a preschool teacher whose warm smile and compassionate heart left a lasting impression. She often shared simple but meaningful stories about her students, tales of pure honesty and unfiltered emotions. One child gave me a paper flower and said, "This is for when you're sad." Ms. Lily looked at Ethan and added, "You see, our value is like a seed. It may look small, but when nurtured, it can bloom into a garden that touches others. You just have to care for it." Then there was Mr. Daniel, a middle-aged man Ethan met at a personal growth workshop. Daniel shared his story, how he had lost loved ones, failed in business, and hit rock bottom. "I used to think my worth came from achievements, from how much I earned or how many people admired me. But I realized real value lies in how we rise after falling. Nobody can take away the worth we assign ourselves unless we let them." Ethan listened intently. Daniel's words stayed with him, like a compass in foggy weather. Later, during a trip to a distant countryside, Ethan stayed with a humble farming family. Every morning, before dawn, the eldest son would wake up and work the fields with his siblings. There were no titles, no degrees, no performance reviews, just sincerity, hard work, and unity. They treated the soil with reverence and one another with tenderness. One evening, gathered around a fire under a starry sky, the family elder shared stories of their struggles, harvests ruined by storms, years of hardship endured with hope. He said, "We believe every grain of rice carries the effort and heart of a family. Even if the world doesn't see it, we know its worth." The simplicity and strength of their life touched Ethan deeply. It made him realize that value isn't in what the world applauds, but in how we live with integrity and purpose, whether or not anyone else is watching. One day, walking along a quiet riverside path, Ethan paused and looked into the calm water. He saw his reflection, not as a broken, directionless young man, but as someone who had scars, yes, but also strength. He whispered to himself, "If I look like this, then what is my real worth?" The question lingered. He began journaling every day, pouring his thoughts and emotions onto paper. His journal became a sanctuary, a mirror reflecting his inner world. Page by page, he started rediscovering a person who was not only capable, but deeply worthy of compassion and love. Over time, Ethan formed a personal philosophy. True worth isn't measured by titles, income, or accolades. It's found in one's persistence, willingness to learn, and capacity to keep loving oneself despite pain. The people he met, Ms. Lily, Mr. Daniel, the farmer, and his family, each played a role in awakening this truth within him. Ethan started volunteering, mentoring youth who faced similar struggles, and offering what he had once lacked. Someone who listened, who saw worth when it wasn't obvious. One golden afternoon, while sipping coffee near a window, Ethan reunited with Sophia. She smiled, seeing a different Ethan than the one from before. "You've changed," she said. "You still face challenges, but you no longer shrink from them. You've learned to value yourself. And that's everything." Ethan smiled, warmth rising from within. He had realized that self-worth doesn't bloom overnight. It grows slowly, tenderly, through setbacks and self-acceptance. The more you honor your own story, the more your light begins to shine, even through the darkest hours. Part 4. The Shoemaker's Teachings. During his journey of rediscovery, there were still days when Ethan felt exhausted, days when self-doubt returned like a shadow that refused to leave. Each failure still left its sting, and careless words from others could still pierce his heart like tiny daggers. And whenever he felt like giving up, there was one person he thought of, Mr. Thomas, the quiet shoemaker with gentle hands and eyes that had once seen straight through his pain. One early morning, after a night of tossing and turning, Ethan returned to the little shop. Everything remained as he remembered. The old wooden counter, the scent of aged leather and polish, the flickering warmth of the light above. Mr. Thomas sat silently behind his workbench, his calm presence as steady and comforting as always. Ethan didn't say a word at first. He simply took out the pair of shoes, the ones Mr. Thomas had mended years ago, and placed them on the counter. Then he sat down. After a long pause, Mr. Thomas broke the silence with a quiet voice. "Do you remember these shoes?" Ethan nodded, his voice soft. "Yes, I've kept them all this time. They've walked with me through so much. They remind me of who I used to be and who I'm becoming." Mr. Thomas looked at him, his eyes kind. "You see, those shoes once belonged to a young man filled with hope. But over time, pain and failure made him forget his worth. These shoes, they were scuffed, torn, worn out, yet they were never worthless. I only helped fix the surface. Their soul, the memories, the purpose was always intact. You're the same. No matter how worn down you feel, your true worth lies inside, and no one can take that from you, Ethan." Listen closely, every word carving deeper into his heart. The old man continued, "There was a time I too believed my value came from my reputation, from the praise I received. I made beautiful shoes, yes. But when I lost everything, I thought, I was nothing. I gave up the spotlight. I came here to repair, to serve quietly. And that's when I began to understand. Real worth isn't found in applause or wealth. It's found in how we live, in our kindness, our resilience, our sincerity." He paused, placing his hand gently on the shoes between them. "You don't have to prove anything to be worthy. You already are. You just have to stop forgetting it." For a long time, Ethan said nothing, but his eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but awakening. He saw it clearly now. All those years, he had been waiting for someone to validate him, when, all along, it was his own voice that mattered most. Each failure had been a chapter, not the end. Each setback, a stepping stone. Each scar, a reminder of strength. From that day on, Ethan began embracing his story, not erasing the painful parts, but honoring them as part of his journey. He didn't shy away from telling others where he had fallen and, more importantly, how he had risen. With Mr. Thomas's words echoing in his heart, he found new purpose, to be the person he once needed, to remind others of their worth, just as the shoemaker had reminded him. And so, the lessons from the quiet little shop didn't end with Ethan. They traveled further, carried in conversations, in late-night talks with struggling friends, in the letters he wrote to himself and to others. Every time someone told Ethan they felt broken, he would smile and say, "Then it's time to start mending. You're not broken beyond repair, you're just waiting to remember who you are." Part 5. Awakening the Worth Within. Years passed, and Ethan was no longer the lost young man who once walked into Mr. Thomas's shop with a worn pair of shoes and a heavy heart. He had grown, not only in knowledge and experience, but in the quiet confidence that came from knowing his true worth. One spring afternoon, with soft sunlight bathing the streets in gold, Ethan organized a small gathering for young people like him, those still searching, still questioning, still healing. The meeting took place in a cozy cafe, where sunlight streamed through pale curtains, and the scent of fresh tea lingered in the air. Ethan stood at the front, his voice steady but warm. He told his story, not as a hero, but as someone who had once forgotten his worth and had slowly found his way back. He spoke of his early failures, the grief of loss, the nights of silence, and the moments when he wanted to disappear. He spoke of the shoemaker, the repaired shoes, and the wisdom that had saved him. And people listened. Young men and women leaned in, their eyes wide, not in pity, but in recognition. They too had questioned their value. They too had measured themselves by grades, salaries, job titles, and others' approval. But Ethan's story offered a different measure, one rooted in inner truth, not outer praise. One young woman raised her hand and said, "I've always felt like I'm not enough. But hearing your story, I realize that maybe I've just been measuring myself by the wrong ruler." Ethan nodded, his eyes soft. "You are more than enough. Your scars are proof that you've lived, learned, and loved. Worth isn't about being perfect, it's about being real, and choosing to believe in yourself even when no one else does." After the event, people came up to Ethan, not to thank him for being flawless, but to thank him for being honest, for showing them that even broken things can shine again, if held with care and love. In the weeks that followed, Ethan continued his work, volunteering, mentoring, writing. He created safe spaces for conversations around self-worth, identity, and mental well-being. His inbox filled with letters from people he had never met, all touched by his story. And every time someone shared their struggles, Ethan replied with the same simple but powerful truth: your worth was never lost. You just stopped looking in the right place. One evening, as he walked past the shoe shop once more, the sun was setting behind the rooftops. The windows glowed faintly, and Ethan paused to peek inside. Mr. Thomas was still there, quietly repairing a pair of old boots. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Ethan entered, the bell above the door ringing gently. Mr. Thomas looked up and smiled. "I've been telling your story," Ethan said. "The story of the shoes. The story of you." Mr. Thomas chuckled, lightly. "It was never really about the shoes, was it?" Ethan shook his head. "It was about learning to walk again, with dignity." The two sat in silence, the kind that only exists between people who understand each other deeply. Outside, the world moved on, but inside that tiny shop, a legacy lived, a story that had begun with a broken soul and had become a lesson for the soul. Part 6, the final lesson. Years passed, and Ethan became a symbol of quiet strength and self-respect for many young people. The story of the old shoes and Mr. Thomas's wisdom not only helped Ethan rediscover his own worth, but also inspired countless others who had once questioned theirs. Whenever someone asked him, "How did you learn to see your own value?" he would smile and guide them back to the story. Not just about shoes or failure or pain, but about what it means to believe in yourself when everything around you says not to. He'd say, Your value isn't something others can give or take away. It's something you decide. And once you see it, no one can ever make you unsee it again. In everyone's heart, Ethan believed, there existed a pair of worn shoes, symbols of their journey, their wounds, and their growth. Though scuffed and broken by time, they carried stories of endurance and strength. If honored, those shoes could remind us of who we really are, not defined by what we have or what we've done, but by the courage to rise again and again. In one of his public talks, Ethan ended with this reflection: we are not the titles we hold, the numbers in our bank accounts, or the praise we receive. We are our resilience. We are our kindness. We are the quiet moments when we choose to keep going, even when no one's watching. We are the ones who can decide, at any moment, to walk with dignity, even if our shoes are worn, even if our hearts are heavy. Because worth isn't something to be proven, it's something to be remembered. The room fell silent as his words sank in, and in that silence many found something they had long forgotten: their own light. After the crowd dispersed, a young man approached Ethan with tears in his eyes. "I was going to give up," he said. "But your story reminded me that maybe I don't have to." Ethan placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You never did. You just needed to hear that your pain didn't erase your worth. In fact, it's part of what makes you real." From that day on, Ethan continued walking with purpose, not as someone who had it all figured out, but as someone who had learned that self-worth is not a destination, but a practice. And far away, in that little shop down the quiet alley, Mr. Thomas kept working. He rarely spoke of his past, but whenever someone came in with a broken soul and a broken spirit, he would take their shoes, smile gently, and begin the work. Because he knew, sometimes repairing a shoe is just the beginning. Sometimes it's how we begin to repair a soul. Closing words. The story of the Shoemaker and the Priceless Pair of Shoes is not just about a young man finding his way. It is about every one of us, about the days we feel small, about the voices that try to define us, about the doubts that creep in when no one is watching. And most of all, it's about reclaiming the power to say, "I am valuable, not because the world sees it, but because I choose to believe it." No matter where you are in your life, no matter how broken you feel, there is always a path back to yourself. You are not what you've lost, or what others think. You are what you continue to build, with every step, with every scar, with every breath that whispers, "I am enough."